Welcome back for another summer blockbuster. This summer, I'm going behind the scenes of some of the biggest summer blockbuster movies. If you're new here, welcome. Each week, I create a new look using color straight nail strips, and this summer, join me and go behind the scenes to see how these movies were made. If you're interested in new color combos and want to learn some movie magic facts, I would highly recommend that you hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Deep in the Peruvian jungle, an American archaeologist, guided by locals and a man he thinks he can trust, enters a booby-trapped temple. Though he beats the booby traps and gets the golden idol, then nearly escapes with his life, he still loses the artifact to his rival archaeologist René Belloc, who is working for the Nazis. Any guesses of who we're talking about this week? That's right, Indiana Jones. During 1973, George Lucas wrote The Adventures of Indiana Smith. The character's last name was originally Smith, but Spielberg disliked the name Smith, and Lucas casually suggested Jones as an alternative. The name Indiana came from Lucas's Alaskan Malamute called Indiana, and as we learned in the Star Wars video, that this was the same dog that Lucas based the character Chewbacca. In The Last Crusade, Indiana's father revealed that his son's name was actually Henry, and that we named the dog Indiana. This was a little inside joke since he really was named after the dog. Indiana's full name is Dr. Henry Walton Jones Jr. Indiana Jones is modeled after the strong-jawed heroes of the matinee serials and pulp magazines that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg enjoyed in their childhoods. Sir H. Rider Haggard's safari guide and big game hunter Alan Quatermain of King Solomon's Mines is a notable template for Jones. Around the time of the release of Star Wars A New Hope, the two friends first discussed the project. Spielberg told Lucas he wanted his next project to be something fun, like a James Bond movie. Another important influence on the development of the character of Indiana Jones is the Disney character Scrooge McDuck. Carl Barks created Scrooge in 1947 as a one-off relation of Donald Duck in the latter's self-titled comic book. Barks realized that the character had more potential, so a separate Uncle Scrooge comic book series full of exciting and strange adventures in the company of his duck nephews were developed. This Uncle Scrooge comic series strongly influenced George Lucas. This appreciation of Scrooge as an adventurer influenced the development of Jones, and with the prologue of Raiders of the Lost Ark containing a homage to Barks' Scrooge adventure, The Seven Cities of Cibola, published in the Uncle Scrooge No. 7 from September 1954. This homage in the film takes place in the form of a playful mimicking of the removal of the statue from the pedestal and the falling stone sequence of the comic book. So we know that they wanted the character to be an adventurer, but they also wanted the character to have a base of why he's searching for these artifacts. The role as a college professor of archaeology would show that Jones is scholarly and learned in a tweed suit, lecturing on ancient civilizations. At the opportunity to recover important artifacts, Dr. Jones transforms into Indiana, a non-superhero superhero. Producer Frank Marshall said Indiana's a fallible character. He makes mistakes and he gets hurt. That's the other thing people like. He's a real character, not a character with superpowers. Spielberg said that there was a willingness to allow their leading man to get hurt and express his pain, and sometimes be the butt of his own jokes. I mean, Indiana Jones is not a perfect hero. He has imperfections. I think that makes the audience feel that with a little more exercise and a little more courage, they could be just like him. When it came to casting this non-superhero, Spielberg suggested Harrison Ford. Lucas resisted the idea since he had already cast the actor in American Graffiti, Star Wars, and Empire Strikes Back, and did not want Ford to become known as his Bobby De Niro. This is in reference to the fact that fellow director Martin Scorsese regularly cast Robert De Niro in his films. During the intense casting process, Lucas and Spielberg auditioned many actors, finally casting actor Tom Selleck as Indiana Jones. Shortly after pre-production began on Raiders, CBS refused to release Selleck from his contractual commitments to Magnum PI, forcing him to turn down the role. Shooting with the film could have possibly overlapped with the pilot of Magnum P.I., but later turned out that filming the pilot episode was delayed and Selick could have done both. After Spielberg suggested Ford again, Lucas relented and Ford was cast in the role with less than 3 weeks before filming. The movies. First up was Raiders of the Lost Ark. Set in 1936, Indiana Jones is hired by a government agent to locate the Ark of the Covenant before the Nazis. The Nazis have their own research team searching for religious artifacts, including the Ark, which is rumored to make any army that carries the Ark before it invincible. With the help of his former lover and tough bar owner Marion Ravenwood and his friend Sala, Indiana manages to recover the Ark in Egypt. The Nazis steal the Ark and capture Indiana and Marion. Belloc and the Nazis perform a ceremony to open the Ark, but when they do, they all, minus Indiana and Marion, are killed by the Ark's wrath. In the end, the Ark is sent to the United States, where it's stored in a secret government warehouse. The screenplay was completed in December of 1979. Though Lucas wanted to fund Raiders, Lucasfilm lacked the money, and other studios would reject the project mainly due to the proposed budget of $20 million, and they were hesitant to work with Spielberg. At this time, Spielberg was known to go over schedule and budget, as we learned in Jaws. Michael Eisner was president of Paramount Pictures at this time and compromised with Lucas, agreeing to his deal in exchange for an exclusive rights of any sequel and severe penalties for exceeding the schedule or budget. Lucas reportedly negotiated a salary between $1 million and $4 million plus a share of gross profits, though a separate report stated that he only received net profits. Spielberg received up to $1.5 million as the director and shared the gross profits. And Spielberg and Lucas made this deal with Paramount Pictures for 5 Indiana Jones films. Filming began on June 23, 1980. Locations chosen were Tunisia and Hawaii, and the Elstree Studios in England were chosen because of its well-staffed artists and technicians who had worked on Star Wars. Tunisia was used to portray Egypt, and the Cairo village was filmed in the city of Kairouan. Because the movie was set in 1936, over 300 TV antennas had to be removed from the surrounding houses, delaying filming by a day. Also, due to budget constraints, the desired 2,000 extras as diggers had to be lowered to 600 extras. Next, filming moved to Hawaii for the exterior shots of the Peruvian jungle. The mountain Kolola on the island of Kauai was used for the mountain you see in the beginning of the film when the Paramount logo fades into the real mountain. For the exterior shots, like the Peruvian temple and the snake-infested Well of Souls scene, filming continued at the Elstree Studios in England. After 73 days, filming was finished in September of 1980. And for the score of the film, John Williams served as the composer, and just a few weeks, he had the Indiana Jones theme, The Raiders March, complete. On June 12, 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark was released in US and Canada, and the film earned $8.3 million and finished as the #1 film in the first weekend. By September, it was declared the top box office film of the summer and grossed a total of $125 million. It became one of the top 4 highest-grossing films ever, a list dominated by Lucas and Spielberg with Jaws, Star Wars, and The Empire Strikes Back. The Temple of Doom was the next film in the series, but it actually was a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, taking place a year earlier in 1935. Spielberg and Lucas aimed to make Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom much darker because of the personal moods following their respective breakups and divorces. Lucas made the film a prequel as he did not want the Nazis to be the villain again. He had ideas regarding the Monkey King and a haunted castle, but eventually created the Sankara stones. He hired writers that had an interest in Indian culture. Filming began on April 18th, 1983 and concluded on August 26th of the same year. The cost was $28.7 million, $8 million more than Raiders of the Lost Ark. On May 23, 1984, Temple of Doom was released and broke records with an acclaimed $45.7 million in its first week. The film was 1984's highest-grossing film. Temple of Doom went on to win an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. Closing out the 1980s, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was released on May 24, 1989. Since Temple of Doom received mixed reactions, Spielberg chose to tone down the dark tone and graphic violence with this installment. Spielberg decided to invoke the film with the spirit and tone of Raiders of the Lost Ark, including bringing back the Nazis as the villain. Lucas first introduced the Holy Grail as an idea for the film's prologue, which was set in Scotland. He intended the Grail to have a pagan base, with the rest of the film revolving around a separate Christian artifact in Africa. Spielberg did not care for the Grail idea, especially after Lucas suggested giving it healing powers and the ability to grant immortality. In September 1984, Lucas completed an 8-page treatment titled Indiana Jones and the Monkey King, which was soon to be followed by an 11-page outline. The story saw Indiana battling a ghost in Scotland before finding the Fountain of Youth in Africa. Dissatisfied, Spielberg suggested introducing Indiana's father, Henry Jones Sr. Lucas was dubious, believing that the Grail should be the story's focus, but Spielberg convinced him that the father and son relationship would serve as the great metaphor in Indiana's search for artifacts. Remember when Spielberg wanted to make movies that were fun like James Bond films? Well, this is a big reason why Sean Connery was chosen for the role of Indiana Jones' father in The Last Crusade. Spielberg earned the rank of Eagle Scout and Ford the Life Scout badge in their youth, which gave them the inspiration for the prologue of the film, where Indiana Jones is a Life Scout at age 13 and is portrayed by River Phoenix. Also in the prologue, we get some backstory on how he got his whip, his hat, and the scar on his chin, as well as why he is so afraid of snakes. Did you ever notice that his hat never or rarely falls off his head? One of the reasons is that Harrison Ford would actually staple the fedora to his head, so that means that some of the blood was actually his own. Filming began on May 16, 1988, and in late 1988, filming was finished except for the closing shot of the movie. In early 1989, the shot of Indiana, Henry, Sala, and Brody riding into the sunset was filmed in Amarillo, Texas. On the Wednesday before Memorial Day weekend, the film was released in over 2,000 theaters and earned over $37 million in the first 4 days. It broke records and grossed over $50 million, beating the $45.7 million record of Temple of Doom. As a huge fan of Indiana Jones films, let's talk about some connections between the movies. We can clearly see that Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade were very similar in how the stories unfold. In the opening of Raiders, Indiana is on a quest for the Golden Idol artifact, and even though he beats the temple and gets out, he still loses the idol to the villain Belloc. Of course, he nearly escapes that encounter, but returns to the university and sadly informs Brody that he did not get the artifact. In The Last Crusade, we see a young Indiana take the Golden Cross of Coronado from the robbers, but just as he thinks it's safe with the sheriff, it's given back to the man in the Panama hat. But this time, many years later, Indy catches up with the man in the Panama hat and finally secures the cross. Back to the university, he's happy to reveal to Brody that he got it. During Indiana Jones' lecture to his students, he says a few things that later he will contradict himself. First, he says, archaeology is a search for fact, not truth. So forget any ideas you've got about lost cities, exotic travel, and digging up the world. We do not follow maps to bury treasure, and X never ever marks the spot. Well, all of these are false, and in the movie, we learn that X really does mark the spot. When they follow his father's map to find the second marker of the Holy Grail, there's a giant X on the floor, which in fact marks the spot to find the knight's shield. In the same lecture, he says 70% of archaeology is done in the library, research, reading. In the fourth installment, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Indy and Mutt are on Mutt's motorcycle being chased by the KGB. They ride into the library and slide to a stop where a student of Dr. Jones asks a question of him about archaeology. And Indiana responds, "If you want to be a good archaeologist, you need to get out of the library." The Ark of the Covenant appears in both Last Crusade and Crystal Skull. After Indiana discovers the X really does mark the spot, and he and Elsa head down to the underground tunnel, she discovers a painting on the wall and asks what it is. Indiana's response is the Ark of the Covenant. Elsa asks, "Are you sure?" And Indy says, "Pretty sure." In the Crystal Skull, the beginning of the movie, they're in the warehouse that we see at the end of Raiders, and after all the fighting, we see a crate that has been cracked open, revealing the Ark. Now let's talk about some connections with other movies. Okay, mainly Star Wars. Let's start with Walter Donovan, played by Julian Glover. He is the main villain in Last Crusade, mainly because he sides with the Nazis to obtain the Holy Grail. In the scene where Donovan is showing the broken tablet to Indiana, Donovan's wife comes in briefly to tell him that he's neglecting his guests. If you listen very closely, you can actually hear the Imperial March playing on the piano, which leads me to one of my favorite memes and connections. It goes, James Earl Jones and Harrison Ford devise a plan in 1992, go back in time and assassinate Hitler. Ford will go back to 1938 to take on the Nazis, and Jones will travel back to a galaxy far, far away, because the actor who plays Donovan is in Empire Strikes Back and part of the Empire, and the actor who plays Hitler in Last Crusade is also part of the Empire. In 1938, Ford fails to kill Hitler, but succeeds in killing Donovan. So Hitler flees and travels to a galaxy far, far away where Jones is waiting patiently to assassinate Hitler, thus making this the greatest team-up ever. Continuing with Star Wars and Indiana Jones Easter eggs, in Raiders, the seaplane at the beginning of the film has a registration number of OBCPO on the side. This is a combination of Obi-Wan Kenobi and C-3PO. And in the Well of Souls, where Indy and Sala lifting the Ark out of the box, one of the hieroglyphics is of R2-D2 and C-3PO. In the Temple of Doom, the club where Willie Scott performs is called Club Obi-Wan. 2008 gave us the fourth installment of the Indiana Jones series, and the fifth film is slated to be released in July of 2022. As many blockbusters, the film inspired books, video games, theme park attractions, and the TV series Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this adventure of Keeping Up with the Joneses, and we'll see you for the next one.